Imagine being like just ravenously, desperately hungry, and you're seated right in front of this massive banquet of your absolute favorite food.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And the aroma is incredible. The feast is completely limitless. But there is this really horrifying catch. Your throat has shrunk down to the exact diameter of a sewing needle.
Oh, wow. That is bleak.
Yeah. So no matter how desperately you want to eat, you physically cannot swallow a single drop. You just have to sit there completely starving, right in the presence of total abundance.
It's just a visceral, deeply unsettling image, honestly. And yet it perfectly captures, the psychological reality that millions of people are living with right this very second.
It really does. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really profound framework for understanding that exact feeling.
Yeah, that modern sense of alienation.
Exactly, that free-floating anger so many of us just carry around, and that exhausting, endless search for belonging. But more importantly, we're going to uncover a concrete, step-by-step path to actually heal intergenerational trauma.
And it really is a path that shifts the entire paradigm on how you view your family, your society, and ultimately the roots of your own internal suffering.
Totally. And our guide for this exploration today is a teaching by the late Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh.
Which is just a brilliant source.
It is. It's a concept titled Helping Hungry Ghosts. And it was delivered at his practice center, Plum Village. And we sourced this directly from the Plum Village app on YouTube.
Right.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how we heal, we obviously first have to understand the ailment itself.
Yeah, you have to diagnose the problem.
Right. So Thich Nhat Hanh once recalled walking through the upper hamlet of his center, and he saw this young woman walking alone. And he noted that, just energetically speaking, she didn't even look like a human being. She looked like a ghost.
Yeah, he immediately recognized her as what he calls a hungry ghost. And, in Buddhist psychology, this isn't a literal apparition from a horror movie or something.
Right. Not a literal ghost.
No, it's a very specific psychological profile. Basically, a hungry ghost is an individual produced by an environment that has completely failed to nourish them.
Like a broken family or a fractured society.
Exactly. Or even a hollowed-out tradition. Because they haven't received the emotional or spiritual nutrients they actually need, they become entirely rootless.
They just wander.
They wander, and they carry this deep, systemic anger toward their parents, toward society, and toward the traditions they were raised in.
I mean, they just want to abandon everything and find something true to belong to, but they constantly come up empty. And the thing that struck me in the source is that he notes our modern way of living produces literally tens of thousands of these hungry ghosts every single day.
The scale is just staggering, honestly.
It really is. Which brings us back to that terrifying physical metaphor we started with. The hungry ghost is depicted as having this massive, swollen belly.
Representing an infinite, agonizing hunger for love and understanding.
Right, but they have that needle-thin throat.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, why the throat? Like, why that specific imagery?
Well, this raises an important question, because we have to ask, why is the throat so small? What is the actual psychological mechanism that closes it off?
Right. What's the blockade?
The needle-thin throat is the direct manifestation of suspicion.
Suspicion. Okay.
Yeah, think about it. When you grow up in an environment where you are repeatedly misunderstood, unseen, or just fundamentally unloved, your psychological defense system goes into absolute overdrive.
You learn that vulnerability is dangerous.
Precisely. Vulnerability is a threat. So you stop trusting altogether. And over time, that lack of trust becomes a rigid blockade.
So even if someone offers you love, you can't take it.
Exactly. If a friend or a partner or a community tries to offer you this banquet of love and support, your suspicion makes it physically and emotionally impossible for you to absorb it. The throat is essentially closed.
You deflect it instinctively. It's like pouring fresh water onto a slab of concrete, right? It just runs right off, leaving the concrete completely dry.
That's a great way to put it.
And the teaching argues that this inability to absorb love stems from a fundamental lack of roots. Like, to be a happy, stable person, you actually need to be deeply anchored in the ground.
You need a foundation.
Yeah. And the source says a human being requires two distinct sets of roots to survive: the blood family and the spiritual family.
Right. And let's look at the blood family first, because we tend to view our parents in absolute isolation, like just as two individuals who raised us, or maybe as authority figures we rebel
Sure,
against.
yeah, just mom and dad.
Exactly. But Thich Nhat Hanh frames them entirely differently. He says your mother and father are simply the youngest, most recent generation of your ancestors.
Oh, that's such a paradigm shift.
It really is. They are the immediate gateway to a lineage that stretches back thousands of years.
They are the conduit.
Mm.
Like, if your parents are relatively happy and at peace, that conduit is open. They transmit the seeds of love, trust, and resilience from your ancestors directly into you.
And then you feel connected to a long line of humanity.
Right, but if that relationship is fractured, if you're deeply estranged from your parents, you don't just lose two people. You actually sever your connection to your entire ancestral line.
You cut off the root.
You cut off the root, and the tree begins to wither. And that's how you become a hungry ghost.
But biological roots alone are not enough to sustain a human psyche, you know. We also crave meaning, purpose, and a moral framework.
Which brings in the second family.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the spiritual family comes in. These are the lineages of belief, tradition, and community.
So we're talking about rabbis, pastors, priests, spiritual teachers throughout history.
Right. And just like the blood family, this spiritual family relies entirely on transmission. A spiritual leader is supposed to receive the wisdom, the compassion, the deep insights.
What the teaching actually calls the jewels of their tradition.
Yes, the jewels. And they are supposed to pass those jewels on to you. But as we all know, that frequently fails.
Sadly, yeah, it fails a lot.
It fails because the leaders themselves are often hungry ghosts. If a pastor or rabbi hasn't received the true jewels of their tradition, they literally have no actual wisdom to transmit.
Because they never got it themselves.
Exactly. So instead of offering profound understanding, they offer dogma. They impose arbitrary rules. They demand compliance rather than fostering true connection.
And when a tradition imposes rigid rules without understanding your actual human suffering, communication completely breaks down.
Completely.
You end up battling the very institutions that were supposed to provide your spiritual roots. Like, you fight your priest, you walk away from your temple or your church, and suddenly you are disconnected from your spiritual ancestors, just like your blood ancestors.
And the consequence of that dual disconnection is just devastating. You are completely untethered. You take all that internal suffering, all that rootlessness, and you inevitably pass it on to your own children.
Which brings us to probably the most difficult part of this deep dive. Because if this dual disconnection causes such profound suffering, how do we actually repair those roots?
Especially when the anger feels so justified.
Exactly. When your anger toward an abusive parent or a hypocritical religious institution is completely valid, what do you do? And Thich Nhat Hanh tells this really incredible story about a young American man who came to Plum Village.
Oh, this story is so powerful.
It really is. This man was carrying a suffocating amount of anger toward his father. And the real tragedy of it was that his father had already died.
Right, because death doesn't automatically heal that needle-thin throat.
The person is gone, but the anger is still there.
The blockade remains entirely intact within the survivor. The anger just loses its physical target and begins to consume the person holding it.
So to help this young man, Thich Nhat Hanh introduced him to a profound teaching called the emptiness of transmission.
And we should clarify what emptiness means here.
Right, because in Buddhism, it doesn't mean a dark void or a state of literal nothingness.
No, not at all.
It means empty of a separate self. It means everything is entirely interconnected. And here's where it gets really interesting. The practice to realize this involves something as ordinary as taking a shower.
The shower reflection is such a brilliant, accessible tool to break down the illusion of our individuality.
Yeah, so think about standing under the warm water in your shower. You look down at your own body. The teaching asks you to view your body not as an independent creation, but as an object that was transmitted, almost like a baton passed in a relay race.
Your parents are the transmitters.
Yes, your parents are the transmitters, your body and consciousness are the object being transmitted, and you were simply the receiver.
You have to deeply meditate on the fact that your parents didn't just pass down genetic code. Like, we're not just talking about your height or predisposition to heart disease.
Right, it's not just biology.
They transmitted themselves. Every unhealed trauma, every moment of buried joy, every talent they never got to use, and every fear they harbored. It was all packaged and downloaded directly into you.
Okay, here is where I have to push back a little bit.
Yeah.
Because this challenges the absolute core of how we think in the West.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge culture clash.
We pride ourselves so much on our individuality. So if I'm furious because my parents failed to nourish me, if they were emotionally neglectful or outwardly abusive, it feels incredibly counterintuitive to accept that I am them.
I know it's a really tough pill to swallow.
It's almost like looking at a deeply flawed, glitchy computer program and being told, hey, you aren't the frustrated user banging on the keyboard trying to fix the software. You are the faulty code itself.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. Like, how on earth does accepting that I am the flawed code help me heal? Why wouldn't I want to just distance myself from it as much as possible?
And that analogy perfectly captures the exact resistance we all feel when we're first confronted with this teaching. We desperately want to be the user, completely separate from the code, because that gives us a sense of control.
And distance from the pain.
Yes, distance from the pain. But the insight of what he calls deep looking reveals that the boundary between the user and the code is a complete illusion. You cannot distance yourself from the code because you are quite literally made of it.
Wow. So there really is no separate self.
There is no separate self. You are your father. You are your mother. When you hold on to intense anger toward your father, you are fundamentally directing that anger at a core part of your own consciousness.
It's like emotional self-mutilation.
That's exactly what it is. You cannot amputate the code without destroying the whole system. The only way to find any internal peace, to actually heal your own suffering, is to reconcile with the transmitter.
Because making peace with him is the exact same thing as making peace with yourself.
Precisely.
So the young American man took this really heavy realization and he actually put it into practice. He placed a photograph of his deceased father right on his desk and he set a little lamp next to it.
Setting up a real space for mindfulness.
Yeah. And every time he sat down, he would look directly into his father's eyes, practice his mindful breathing, and touch the reality that he was his father's continuation.
And through that focused practice, the anger actually began to shift. He had this profound breakthrough realization. His father hadn't maliciously withheld love from him. His father simply lacked the capacity to transmit love and trust.
Why? Because he didn't have it either.
Exactly. The father's own seeds of trust had never been watered. They were buried under layers of unhealed suffering that he inherited from the grandfather. The father was, in his own time, a hungry ghost with a needle-thin throat.
He literally couldn't give what he didn't have. And I think to help us reach that same level of realization, Thich Nhat Hanh developed a very specific two-part guided meditation that he used for the hungry ghosts at Plum Village.
Yeah, and it revolves around the image of a 5-year-old child.
Right. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So the practice begins by focusing entirely inward. For a week or two, you just sit and align your breathing with a simple visualization. You say, breathing in, I see myself as a 5-year-old boy or girl. Breathing out, I smile to that 5-year-old.
It sounds so simple.
It does, but you have to really meditate on the sheer fragility of a child at that exact age.
Think about it. At 5 years old, you have absolutely zero psychological armor. You are completely porous.
You absorb everything.
Yeah, a single stern look from a parent can just crush your spirit. A raised voice can leave a wound that lasts for decades. You just soak up the environment.
And by visualizing yourself in that state of total vulnerability and intentionally offering a gentle smile to that image, you are generating profound self-compassion.
You're becoming the parent you needed.
Exactly. You are stepping in to nourish and protect the child inside you that the adults around you failed to protect. You are, slowly but surely, widening your own throat.
And once you've stabilized that self-compassion, the practice flips, which is where it gets really challenging. You shift the focus outward to the person who actually hurt you.
The perpetrator.
Yeah. You say, breathing in, I see my father as a 5-year-old boy. Breathing out, I smile to the 5-year-old boy that was my father. Or, of course, your mother.
And what's fascinating here is how violently this disrupts our normal mental models. Like, we usually view our parents as these towering figures, right? Infallible, powerful, or sometimes truly terrifying.
Huge forces in our lives.
Right. So to strip away all those decades of adulthood and visualize the man who caused you so much pain as this tiny, fragile little boy in shorts who could be brought to tears by a harsh tone from his own father.
It just shatters the architecture of the resentment.
It really does. It forces you to see the chain of causality. Your parent was a victim long before they were a perpetrator.
And recognizing that victimhood across generations is really the only thing powerful enough to break the anger, because the stakes for doing this work are ultimate. The teaching warns about something called the Wheel of Samsara.
Right, and samsara is often translated as the endless cycle of suffering. But in this context, it isn't some mystical, abstract concept about what happens after you die.
No, it's very practical.
It is the inescapable psychological inevitability of transmitting your trauma. If you refuse to practice this deep looking, if you hold on to your righteous anger, your seeds of love and trust remain tiny and dormant.
Your throat stays the size of a needle.
Exactly. And because you are the transmitter for the next generation, when you have children of your own, you will unknowingly pass that needle-thin throat directly to them.
Despite all your promises to be different than your parents. Huh.
The behavioral loop will just execute itself, the wheel turns, and a brand new generation of hungry ghosts is born.
But the real beauty of this framework is that if you can break that cycle of suffering in your blood family through compassion, you actually unlock the exact mechanism needed to repair your fractured spiritual lineage as well.
Because the mechanism of failure is identical.
Totally.
Your spiritual roots were severed because a flawed human being, a rigid pastor, an angry priest, a judgmental rabbi, they transmitted pain instead of wisdom.
And Thich Nhat Hanh actually spoke to a lot of Westerners who had fled their Judeo-Christian upbringings to come to his Buddhist center. They were actively seeking refuge from that specific spiritual trauma.
And he offered them a deeply challenging instruction, actually.
He didn't just say, yes, stay here and be Buddhist.
No, not at all. Instead of telling them to abandon their roots and convert to Buddhism, he told them to use the practice of mindfulness to go back and discover the hidden jewels within their own traditions.
He pointed out that the true equivalents of mindfulness, compassion, and deep understanding, they exist within Judaism, Christianity, and really every major tradition.
They're already there.
You just have to know how to look past the flawed transmitter to actually find them.
Because we so often mistake the faulty transmitter for the tradition itself, a judgmental priest does not mean the underlying teachings of unconditional love are false.
Right.
It just means the priest was a hungry ghost who couldn't access those teachings himself. By healing your own needle-thin throat, you gain the capacity to bypass the human error of your religious upbringing.
You can dig into the texts, the rituals, and the community to find the actual values, the jewels that were always waiting there for you. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Ultimately, this deep dive is a call to take radical responsibility for your own lineage. A person without roots cannot be happy.
We aren't meant to just drift.
We are meant to drift through life, constantly searching for belonging while aggressively rejecting everything we come from. The teaching really urges you to transition from being a passive consumer of your family or religion to being an active healer of it.
You have to go back home. You have to use your own cultivated compassion to help your parents, your rabbis, your priests, and your pastors.
Even if you do it entirely in your own mind.
Yes. Even if it's just through the 5-year-old visualization, you are restoring the flow of transmission.
You are rediscovering these positive seeds to nourish yourself and to ensure that when it is finally your turn to be the transmitter, your children have a deeply anchored foundation to stand on.
And that's really the ultimate goal here.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We started with the tragic reality of the hungry ghost. Starving for connection, but physically and emotionally incapable of absorbing it.
Right.
We learned that the only way to cure this starvation is to reconnect with our blood and spiritual roots. And we explored how the emptiness of transmission teaches us that we are the living embodiment of our ancestors. Holding on to anger toward them is merely anger directed at ourselves.
It's all connected.
So the next time you are overwhelmed by a sense of alienation, or you feel that familiar hot flare of resentment toward your parents or the tradition you were raised in, try the visualization. Breathe in and picture them and yourself as a fragile, defenseless 5-year-old child. Notice how quickly the anger dissolves into a desire to just protect and understand.
And I think the final thing to consider is this. If it is true that we are the literal, unbroken continuation of our ancestors and our children are the direct continuation of us, it means your present state of mind isn't just your own private experience, it is the environment of the future. So what emotional seeds are you watering today, right in this very moment, that will become the inescapable reality of a 5-year-old born a century from now?